sing a couple more songs. Page 526.
Yeah, you did. Solid.
526.
526.
My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I cannot trust the sweetest frame, but wholly lean on Jesus' name. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand. When darkness veils his lovely face, I rest on his unchanging grace. In every high and stormy gale, my anchor holds within the veil. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand. His oath is covenant, his blood support me in the whelming flood. When all around my soul gives way, beneath is all my hope and stay. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand. When he shall come with trumpet sound, oh, may I then in him be found, dressed in his righteousness alone, faultless to stand before the throne. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand. Amen. Page 492.
That you get in?
Bless his heart.
Do you know what key that's in, Miss Becky?
See,
Is it?
492.
Okay, I believe you.
Well, I just want to make sure I was looking at the same.
I made a note and I couldn't read it. So I have a note here what
Well,
key
I
it's
mean,
in.
the way it's written, it's C. I don't know what you might.
Years. What did I do?
Years.
You got the house key.
One more time. Here we go. Oh, yeah.
Years I spent in vanity and pride, caring not my Lord was crucified, knowing not it was for me he died on Calvary. Mercy that was great and grace was free, pardon there was multiplied to me. There my burdens off I live
note said, study that some more. That's too low and C's too high. Let me do that again.
What, D for that?
C's may be too high for me. It's not too high for the book.
Well, he wasn't playing it.
Oh yeah, I wasn't doing that in C. That's the problem. All right, I'll fix that for you again. I'm sorry. My bad.
No problem.
You are so sweet.
You just give us a little demo. Give us a little demo of the request.
Yeah.
All right.
Huh?
No, I'm not doing good enough with this other. Start something new. All right, let's do 327. That'd be good enough.
Oh, okay.
327.
This one should be in B flat.
Well, let's see.
Well, that's where we're putting it anyway.
16. Kind of.
I know Sarah said that.
On a hill far away stood an old rugged cross, the emblem of suffering and shame. And I love that old cross where the dearest and best for a world of lost sinners was slain. So I'll cherish the old rugged cross till my trophies at last I lay down. I will cling to the old rugged cross and exchange it someday for a crown.
Amen.
Oh, the old rugged cross, so despised by the world, as a wondrous
doing that in 6/8, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Now, Brother Mike, I would have done that for you if I had the words in front of me, but
It'll wait.
I've got a song that he showed me that it fits the world we're living in, and it's a pretty good little song. I was going to do it Sunday, but since he's not going to be here, we'll save it for when he's here.
Okay.
We're in Genesis chapter 35.
Woo!
Better late than never. We're in Genesis chapter 35, and if you'll remember, a tragic thing is taking place in Shechem to a young man named Shechem. And we don't know, I've tried to look this up, we don't know if the city was named after the boy or if the boy was named after the city, but we know that we know both the son is named Shechem and the city is named Shechem. There's a whole lot of history there. If you'll remember, Moses wrote this years and years after it happened. So sometimes we don't know what something may have been called when it happened, but when Moses wrote all this down, that's Shechem. And again, I don't know who was named first. But just to refresh your memory, we're not going to back up and read. I'm just going to tell you real quickly. The sister, at this point, the only daughter that we know of that Jacob has is either, I don't know if she was forcibly raped or if it was more of a statutory rape deal, but she had lost her innocence, we'll say, to this young man, Shechem. He wanted to marry her, and so he tries to do right by her, and Jacob doesn't handle this very well. He kind of just goes off on his own, and the boys handle it poorly. And so when we looked at chapter 34, what we remember from last week is that two boys, Simeon and Levi, take it upon themselves to punish the entire city. The way they do that is they convince these men to get circumcised, which puts them in, well, not at their medical best, I guess, for a few days. And in their weakest state, they go in and kill every one of them. Then they loot them. They take their gold, their silver, their cattle, whatever they wanted, they just take it. So these boys do a very bad thing, and remember we talked about our testimony. These are supposed to be God's people, and they're supposed to be exhibiting a godly testimony. I understand a bad thing happened, but here's what you need to know where this applies to us. And I know we're in chapter 35, but I want you to see it even as we look at chapter 35. I want you to understand, where you find out about someone's walk with Jesus is when crisis happens. See, it's easy. It's really easy, honestly, to serve God when everything's going your way. When you're on the mountaintop, when you feel that really close fellowship with Him, when things are going your way, there's plenty of money in the bank, nobody's sick, everybody's doing well. Hey, it's easy to follow the Lord. It's funny to me that America, as well as it's doing, or has done, at least in recent years, financially, you would expect it to be easiest for this nation to honor God when it's been blessed the way it's been blessed. But unfortunately, that's not the case. When we're doing well, that's when we seem to turn our back on God. Maybe not us individually, but people groups throughout history. When God has blessed them and has done wonderful things for them, that's when they get to enjoying the things, the material things, and they turn away from spiritual things. And then when crisis happens, sometimes we as Christians, we don't handle things like we ought to. And so when this happens to Dinah, and it wasn't, something good, but their response to it was even worse. And so when we closed out chapter 34, these boys have already done this. I will just simply read the last few verses of the chapter as we get into chapter 35. So at the end of chapter 34, I'll just read 28 through the end, where it says, "They took their sheep, their oxen, their asses, that which was in the city, that which was in the field. All their wealth, all their little ones, their wives took they captive, and spoiled even all that was in the house. And Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, You have troubled me, to make me stink among the inhabitants of the land." Translation, you've not done a godly thing, you've not given a godly testimony, and now my name and my descendants stink to the people here. "Among the Canaanites and the Perizzites I told you last week, if you didn't know what a Perizzite was, you probably are one. A Perizzite is a country dweller. So if you're a bumpkin like me, you're a Perizzite, okay? That's what that word means. Anyway, the Canaanites would have been more city folk. Perizzites were the country folk. He just meant all of them. Everybody in the region. Even the ones who are not directly affected by it. He says, you've made me stink among them. And I, being few in number, they shall gather themselves together against me and slay me, and I shall be destroyed, I and my house. Now, I think that was the devil's intent. He wanted to destroy God's people, and that's always seems to be his intent. But we have to take some responsibility for the way we act and the things that we do. Now, we come to chapter 35 in verse 1, and the Bible says, God said unto Jacob, arise and go up to Bethel. Now, before we go any further, let me explain something. If God is speaking to him and telling him to go up to Bethel, what do you imagine brought this on? For God to say this to Jacob, what do you imagine is going on with Jacob? I would say that if God's answering him, then when all this took place, Jacob went to God. I would say that, again, better late than never. Jacob, I think, had developed a good relationship with God, but I think that he would probably didn't share that as often as he should have. Maybe he wasn't the forceful leader he should have been. Maybe his household wasn't getting the benefit of his relationship with God. See, it's one thing to have this private relationship with God, but that private relationship with God ought to flow out into the public. People ought to know it and see it. And we ought to lead in a godly manner our own homes and our own families. See, I think Jacob had a walk with the Lord, which is why God had blessed him and taken care of him all the way back from Padan Aram back to Canaan. God had obviously been with him and walked with him and blessed him. But now here he is, and the tragedy strikes, and Jacob doesn't really know how to react, and his sons react in his place, and this bad stuff happens. And I think this put Jacob on his face before God, talking and praying, to which God answers. Chapter 35, verse 1, God said to Jacob, arise, go up to Bethel. Now, y'all will remember Bethel, but we're going to talk about it more in a minute, so I'm not going to skim over it. Arise, go to Bethel, and dwell there, and make there an altar unto God that appeareth unto thee when thou fleddest from the face of Esau thy brother. Again, we're going to look at that in a minute. That we're going to backtrack to that event, so not going to turn there now. Verse 2, then Jacob said to his household, and to all that were with him, put away the strange gods that are among you, and be clean and change your garments. Now, this is a significant statement. Pay attention to what he just said. He said, you've got strange gods, you need to get rid of them. You've got dirty clothes, you need to change them. You need a bath. You've made me stink among the inhabitants of Canaan. Let me put it another way. Have you ever done anything that embarrassed you? You ever done anything that embarrassed your parents? You ever done anything that embarrassed more than just your immediate family? Maybe embarrassed all your friends? I mean, you ever done anything that's really embarrassing? Well, that doesn't even come close to what has happened to Jacob here. This is more than embarrassing. I'll give you an example. When I was growing up, there was a particular family in the city where I grew up. And their last name was Lester. Not that it matters, but that was just their last name. When you said the name Lester, when I was growing up, you automatically got a negative connotation about that family. And it wasn't all of them's fault. There was just some bad apples in that family. And my mom wouldn't let us play with these boys and girls about our age, whose last name was Lester. For the simple fact, well, there were a few things that happened. One of them brought headlights to school. That's never fun. A couple of them boys were bad about throwing rocks at your house and at your car. I mean, they had some bad kids in the family. Apparently, there were some thieves in the family. But just because a few of these Lester kids maybe weren't good kids, doesn't mean the whole family was bad, does it? But sometimes just a few bad apples spoil a whole lot, right? Now, you've got Simeon and Levi killing and robbing an entire city. Honestly, I don't know how you come back from that. I really don't. But Jacob had gotten on his face before God, apparently, and God said, go to Bethel. Bethel is house of God. That's what Bethel means. And he had been there before. But when he seeks the Lord and the Lord tells him to go to Bethel, he says, look, before we go to the house of the Lord, don't miss this. Before we go to the house of the Lord, get rid of all the strange gods, all your idols. And let's clean all you people up and change your clothes. Now right here is a real good scripture for wearing your Sunday best to church. They're going to the house of God. They need to be clean. They need to change your clothes. They need to get the idols out. Let me point out something else. They had just spoiled the Shechemites, right? They'd just taken their animals and their gold and their silver. What do you imagine was amongst all that spoil? Probably. It's one of the things they took from them, was their little G gods. When they spoiled them, they took them. Now, I like what Jacob does here, but the problem is he should have done this sooner. Keep in mind, his kids, all 12 of them to this point, have raised up between Padanaram and Shechem, either amongst the people from back where Laban lived, or amongst the Canaanites. So they picked up some bad habits and some bad religious practices. Well, Jacob, being the leader of this household, shouldn't have waited until this tragedy before he said, hey, we got to clean up. We got to change some things. We got to get some things out. And let me say this to you and be abundantly clear. Don't wait until something bad happens in your family before you're willing to give some stuff up and straighten some things out. Now, I said this Sunday, and you know this, as Baptists we all know this. It's not do and then you live. It's live and then do. In other words, you don't get saved for living good. Right? The Lord saves us and then we live good. Part of that living good is be ye holy as I'm holy. Get some things out of your life, some little G gods out of your life. A big one for me for years has been the cellular telephone. We don't like to talk about it. It's not a fun subject, but some of us care way too much about our telephone. And there's others out there. Okay, there's other little G gods that we have we need to let go of. I've admitted to you, I love football. Sometimes I love it too much. Sometimes I just have to. I've gotten good about not putting it in front of God, but sometimes I just care a little bit too much about what the Cowboys are doing. And I need to care more about what God's doing. Cowboys ain't all that important in the grand scheme of things. I need to worry about what God wants me to do. And those aren't the only two, but those are a couple of examples of some things we need to get rid of. We need to let go of, and we need to be clean. We need to change our garments. We need to, spiritually speaking, we need to change our clothes. Okay? Verse 3, let us arise and go up to Bethel. Again, Bethel means house of God. If you put that in perspective, he's saying, let's clean up and let's go to church. Let's go to the house of God. And I will make there an altar unto God who answered me in the day of my distress and was with me in the way which I went. You know, I wish Jacob had remembered this sooner. I want to show you, we're going to back up just for a moment, just for a reminder, and we're going to look at what happened at Bethel before. Turn to Genesis 28. Now, I know we've already studied this, so this is just a refresher. We won't be there long. But I want you to see what happened there. Now, I'm not going to read the latter experience that he had again, but you'll remember Jacob saw the angels ascending and descending on the ladder. And I'm going to start at verse 16 of chapter 28. It says, Jacob awaked out of his sleep and said, surely the Lord is in this place, and I knew it not. And he was afraid and said, how dreadful is this place? This is none other but the house of God, which is why he names it Bethel. And this is the gate of heaven. And Jacob rose up early in the morning and took the stone that he had put for his pillows. Those must have been soft stones. I can't imagine sleeping on a rock, can y'all? But he took the stone that he had used for a pillow and he set it up for a pillar. You know, there's still rednecks that call their pillows pillars. That's where we get that from.
It was a pillar.
To this day, there are Southerners who call their pillow pillar. And now you know where that comes from. Anyway, but he took his pillar and made it a pillar, and poured oil upon the top of it. This is a drink offering, but we're not going to talk about that right now. And he called the name of that place Bethel, but the name of that city was at the first. And watch verse 20 now. Jacob vowed a vow. It means to make God a promise. Say it. God will be with me. And if there means because. Sometimes that translation is unfortunate because the word has changed meanings, not because it's not accurate. But if sometimes means because. I don't have time to get into that, but sometimes in some places if means because. So you could put the word there, because God is with me, and He'll keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and raiment to put on, then I'm going to serve Him. And that's what His promise is. And I'll just read it in the text that's in. Jacob vowed a vow and said, if God be with me, and will keep me in His way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and raiment to put on, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then shall the Lord be my God. And this stone which I have set for a pillar shall be God's house. And of all that thou shalt give me, I will surely give the tenth unto thee. So he made a promise not only to serve Him, but he made a promise to tithe. Well, there's been some time passed. Now that happened when he was headed away from his father's house. Now he's back in Canaan, but he still hasn't moved back to his father's house. And apparently he has not been back to Bethel. No, we don't know. The Bible doesn't say. But he hasn't been back to Bethel in a long time. It took this tragic event happening. And by the way, if the Canaanites decide to get even with them for the murder of all those at Shechem, they far outnumber Jacob and his children and his servants. If Canaan was so inclined, they could come back with revenge and just wipe them all out. I think that was the devil's plan in all of this. So looking back at chapter 35, he tells them again, and I know I'm belaboring the point, but he tells them to put away the strange gods, to clean up, change your clothes, let's go up to Bethel. And he says, I will make there an altar unto God. He'd already done this once. So when you see it in chapter 35, he's doing this again. He says, who answered me in the day of my distress and was with me in the way which I went. And they gave, this is so sad, verse 4. They gave unto Jacob all the strange gods which were in their hand, and all their earrings which were in their ears. And Jacob hid them under the oak which was by Shechem. Somebody tell me, why do you think they hid them under the oak?
Go back for them.
That's not why I think they did it, but it's a good answer, I guess. Anybody else?
Come back and get them later.
Come back and get it later? I don't think that's why they did it.
Okay.
But there's nothing wrong with that answer.
That's what I think.
It may have been. I'll tell you what I think.
Like offerings to the tree. Thanking the tree.
Here's what I think, and I'm going to give you an illustration from my own life that I'm embarrassed of. Okay, this is me being as real as I know how to be. The year I surrendered to preach, before I ever pastored anywhere, but the year I surrendered to preach, my son had a game that he had no business having. It was a video game. I'm not going to tell you the name of it because I'm ashamed to even have it. I don't remember how we came by it. It was probably one of those garage sale purchases that Daddy wasn't paying attention to. He had a game that was probably for 18 and older, and this was several years ago. It was 6, 7 years ago. He's, what, 13 now? He was too young for a game like that. It had language in it. It had some practices in it that are just completely ungodly. I'm not even going to tell you what all was in it. But nobody really needs this game, kid or not. But he had it. Well, the year I surrendered to preach, one of the things God impressed upon me is there's some things in your own house you need to get cleaned up before you go into the ministry. And so it came to my attention he had this game. I was walking past his room and I heard a word that no kid that age should ever hear. And it stopped me in my tracks. I went in there and I said, what in the world is that coming out of your television? And he was playing this game. Now, he wasn't playing it for that. He was playing it because it's got cars in it and a bunch of neat stuff. He wasn't playing it for that, but it doesn't matter. We had possession of that, and it wasn't good. So I just asked him, and I love him to this day. I love him for this. I was afraid I was going to upset him because I was taking something away and he had done nothing wrong. So I handled it very delicately. I went into his room and I said, son, you think God appreciates that? You think that's a good thing for a boy your age to have? He said, no, Dad, I don't. He said, I just like to play the game. I don't care for that language. He said, I can turn it down when I play it. And I said, yeah, but you think that's what God would have you do? He said, no, sir. So what do you think God would have you do? He said, throw it in the trash. And I'm so thankful he said throw it in the trash, because you know what a lot of kids would have done? They'd have put it up for sale, passed it on to somebody else, contributed to someone else's sinfulness. Now don't get me wrong, people that want to do that are going to do it anyway. But should we make money off of it? See, they could have took these idols and sold them. They could have found a way to benefit off of them. But in essence, what they did was they got rid of them. They buried them in the earth somewhere and left them there, rather than give them to somebody for something in exchange and contribute. Let me explain. If they had a little g golden idol and they sell it for money, well, now they're contributing to someone else's idolatry. Is that the thing to do? It's right to get rid of it. It's not right to get money out of it, right? I don't think. So personally, I think they hit them under the tree, because that was the equivalent to them of throwing it away, letting it go completely. You know how we are. To this day, we don't want to let anything go without a profit, right? Hey, we paid for that. Want something for it. But I don't want to benefit off of something that's going to cause someone else to stumble. That would hurt my conscience too. So I think they did the only thing they could do. They buried it in the ground, hoping nobody would find it. And I wonder how many people have read this and went looking for those gold and silver things that are buried somewhere in Bethel under an oak. When I get to Israel, I may take me a little shovel and just see how many oak trees are. I'm kidding.
I may go with you.
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. But anyway, I'm not saying you're wrong. Maybe they did bury it so they can come back for it, but I don't think so. Because when you pour out something like that and you get rid of it and you let God just take it, you're not going back for that. You're not supposed to anyway. And I'll give you another example. By the way, thank you whoever raised this up. I was going to do it and I kept putting it off. Thank you. Now we can read it.
Yeah, I noticed that.
I don't know who did it and I don't care. Thank you.
This you do in remembrance of me.
Yes. Anyway, but it's kind of like this altar. When you kneel at the altar, and you should very regularly, and you pour out the things that are burdening you, and you lay them on the altar. A lot of people take and they lay all this stuff on the altar, and then when they get through praying, they get up and start picking it back up, putting it back in their pockets and carrying it on out. What good is that? No, when you lay something on the altar, you leave it there and let God have it. Don't pick it up and take it with you. When you pray and you ask God to remove these things that you're struggling with, let Him have it. Don't pick it up and take it with you. And don't try to remember where you buried it so you can go back for it. Because I'm not going to say that wasn't their intent, but I hope not. I hope that's not why they did it that way. But they gave unto Jacob all the strange gods and the earrings, and Jacob hid them under the oak which was by Shechem. And knowing what I know about Jacob, I don't think he ever intended to do that. Verse 5, they journeyed, and the terror of God was upon the cities that were round about them, and they did not pursue after the sons of Jacob. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Good.
Okay. Anybody else? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? It's good because if the people are scared of them, they're not going to come and hurt them. But it's bad because did you want everybody in Canaan scared that you might kill them in their sleep? Or did you want everybody in Canaan seeing the power of God through you and turning their hearts to God? Did you really want that to be your witness? Did you really want that to be your testimony? Everybody in Canaan is scared of them. See, this for years ruined their testimony. Now, I don't know if they would have won anybody or not. But I know how hard it is to win somebody when they see evil in you. And when people looked at these people, what they saw was a family that had killed an entire city. Not the testimony we're looking for. So let me just, for application purposes, let me just say, as Christians, let's make sure our testimony is not ruined. Let's be careful what we do. Be careful how we handle things and how we run our own homes. Because the last thing we want to do is run our testimony with wickedness and then have to answer to God for the fact we've got no testimony. Anyway, it is in a way, it's a good thing. It keeps them from being killed, but it's bad how they did it. So the good news about verse 5 is the people in Canaan didn't come after them and didn't pay them back for the wickedness they'd done. Verse 6, so Jacob came to Luz, which is in the land of Canaan, that is Bethel, he and all the people that were with him. Now at this point, the city's probably still called Luz, but Jacob and his family call it Bethel. This is the house of God to him. Verse 7, he built there an altar again and called the place El Bethel. Now Bethel means house of God. El means God. But here the way this is written is it means strong God of the house of God. It means the God of the house of God. What he did was he basically just reiterated and strengthened what he already believed about this place. Now here's something interesting. Bethel's only about 15 miles from Shechem where they started out. But it's over 1,000 feet higher in elevation. So as he went to Bethel, he got closer to the Lord. At least 1,000 feet higher in elevation. It's only 15 miles, but it's 1,000 feet higher. It's one of the reasons probably why one felt like he was in the presence of Almighty God when he was there. Being that it was only 15 miles away, I wonder if he had been there any during these 25 years or so he lived at Shechem. We just don't know. The Bible doesn't say. But somehow I doubt it. Because he's just now building an altar there. If this was truly the house of God to Jacob, he should have built something there sooner. And he should have gone there frequently. And by the way, we should go to the house of God frequently. Once every 25 years isn't good enough. Verse 7. He built there an altar and called the place El Bethel, because there God appeared unto him when he fled from the face of his brother. Verse 8. But Deborah, Rebekah's nurse. Now this is an interesting little side note, and this may be as far as I get to get. I'm not going to get to finish the chapter. But this is interesting. Y'all remember Rebekah, right? Rebekah is Jacob's mother that came out of Padan Aram. When she came, her father had allowed her to bring some servant girls with her. Chief of these was Deborah. Now by this time, Rebekah's already passed away. We don't know when, the Bible doesn't say, but at some point, either while Jacob was gone into Padan Aram or since he's been home, Rebekah's passed away and the Bible doesn't mention it. Now here's what's neat about this. How many people did Jacob take with him to Padan Aram? Nobody. When he saw God at Bethel, he was alone. Right? He didn't take anybody to Laban's house with him. So Deborah was still with his mom. At some point since he's been home, Deborah has switched households. She was there with Isaac, probably after Rebekah died. Deborah didn't have any function anymore in Isaac's home, I guess. Maybe Isaac didn't like her, or maybe he had somebody he liked better helping him. I don't know. But at some point, Deborah moves from Isaac's house to Jacob's house. Moves to his household there at Shechem. Now what this tells me is that whether Jacob had been to Bethel or not, he had been to Hebron. He'd been to visit his father and his brother since they'd been home. The Bible just doesn't tell us how often. We don't know. We just don't know. But because Deborah's mentioned here, we know that she went from living with Abraham's household to Jacob's. I'm sorry, Isaac's. Anyway, Deborah, Rebekah's nurse, died, and she was buried beneath Bethel under an oak. I hope not under the same oak. I don't know. Maybe there are a lot of oak trees in Bethel. I don't know. And the name of it was called Elam Bakuth, which means the oak of weeping. Apparently she was loved and cherished. She probably played a grandmother type role to Jacob's children in place of Rebekah, who's passed away. Verse 9. God appeared unto Jacob when he came out of Padan Aram and blessed him. And God said to him, Thy name is Jacob. Thy name shall not be called any more Jacob, but Israel shall be thy name. And he called his name Israel. And from here on out, that's what he's called. God said unto him, I am God Almighty. This is in the Hebrew El Shaddai. He's revealed himself in the same terms to Abraham and Isaac. And now he reveals himself to Jacob as El Shaddai, God Almighty. He says, Be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall be of thee, and kings shall come out of thy loins. And the land which I gave Abraham and Isaac to thee, I will give it. And thy seed after thee will I give the land. And God went up from him in the place where he talked with him. Jacob set up a pillar in the place where he talked with him, even a pillar of stone, and he poured a drink offering thereon, and he poured oil thereon. For them that don't know, this drink offering is more of an auxiliary gift. It's not really in the offerings that are in the Levitical practices. I mean, it's not a primary part of the Levitical sacrificial offerings, but they were offered frequently as an auxiliary gift, just an extra added way of honoring God. So these drink offerings are actually pretty common. You see them throughout Scripture, but it wasn't something that was commanded. It's something more of this is what I feel like doing and offering God. So it's just an extra way that you can. It's kind of like even today we have tithes and we have offerings. Tithe is more of what the Lord requires of us. Offerings is more of what we just feel like giving. And so he does this. This is the first place we see it called that, a drink offering. It's not the first time he did it. He did it in Genesis 28. It's the first time we see it called a drink offering. Verse 15, Jacob called the name of the place where God spake with him, Bethel. And we know that already. Verse 16, they journeyed from Bethel, and there was but a little way to come to Ephrath, and Rachel travailed and she had hard labor. I am going to close with this story. It's kind of a sad place to stop, but I want to talk about it for just a minute because this is going to come back up later, and it's important to note. They're headed south. When they came from Padan Aram, and I don't have a map to show you, but just kind of visualize if you will, they came from the northeast, so they're headed southwest. When they came into Canaan, and they kind of just landed at Shechem and stayed there for 25 years. Well, on his way to his daddy's house, on the way is Bethel. So he goes to Bethel, to the house of God, and from the house of God, he carries on down to Hebron. He's headed to see his father. On the way, Rachel goes into labor. Now, Rachel hadn't had a kid in 15 years. And the other women had left Barrington. They haven't had any more children either. Rachel had been praying and asking God to give her children, but if you'll remember, Rachel had some idolatrous practices. So for whatever reason, God had not given her any more kids. Well, she finally does get pregnant, and we believe she goes into labor prematurely. Now, why do you think that is? And I'm just asking to see if anybody has a guess. They're traveling. Right. If they knew she was going to give birth, you wouldn't think they'd be actively moving. Probably thought they had time to get settled at Daddy's house and then give birth. Well, she gives birth on the way. Here's what's neat. And I'm not going to turn to Micah 5:2, but if you know the verse, it's a reference to Christ who was born in Bethlehem. But there's another word there. Ephratah. Ephratah, Bethlehem. Well, this is the place where little Benjamin's going to be born. Same place Jesus is going to be born way later. It's kind of a sad thing that happens here, but this is where they are. They're actually not that far from Jerusalem here. They're south of it, headed to Hebron. But anyway, they're in Ephratah. Verse 16 calls it Ephrath. It's the same thing. But when they get there, Rachel goes into hard labor. Verse 17, it came to pass when she was in hard labor that the midwife said to her, "Fear not, thou shalt have this son also." In other words, the baby's going to be fine. He may be premature, but he's going to make it. Verse 18, it came to pass as her soul was in departing, for she died, that she called his name Ben-Oni. But his father called him Benjamin. I have a note about this, and I wanted to share it before we close out for the evening. Ben-Oni means son of sorrow. And she may have just said that because she was in a lot of pain. She was dying. It's not a very nice name. If you're a little boy growing up, you don't want to be remembered as the kid that killed your mama anyway. You certainly don't want a name to remind you of it. Son of sorrow wouldn't be very nice. So I think it was with much grace and love that his father changed it to Benjamin, which means instead son of the right hand, which is more of an honored position in the family. A son of the right hand would be a more honored position. And I think he did that out of love for Rachel and out of love for Benjamin. Benjamin's the baby. Benjamin's also the son of the favored wife. But unfortunately, Rachel dies here. It's just a sad event that happens there at Bethlehem. Verse 19 says, Rachel died and was buried in the way to Ephrath, which is Bethlehem, and I've already told you that. And Jacob set up a pillar upon her grave, that is the pillar of Rachel's grave, unto this day. I'm going to close at verse 21. Notice the name change. And Israel, before this he's called Jacob. Here it says, Israel journeyed and spread his tent beyond the Tower of Edar. Now there's something else bad going to happen here, but we're not going to talk about it tonight. We'll talk about it next week. There's a series of some things that are happening, and I think it was probably in part because of this poor testimony that he's had. Even though he's correcting it, he's trying to get, he's forgiven. The things that we do still have consequences, and they carry on for a period of time. So we've talked about how important it is to try to keep a good testimony, but just understand that when we do things we shouldn't do, and our testimony does get, I wouldn't say ruined, but we get a setback in it, sometimes it takes some time before we can get that straightened out. So we've got to be very careful what we do and how we do it, especially with how we lead our families. Remember, our kids are watching us. Even grown kids learn from us. As a 41-year-old man, when I think about my kids watching me, I worry that they'll pick up bad habits, bad practices of mine. I want, just like all good fathers want, I want my kids to be better than I am. I want them to love God and honor God and live better lives than I've lived. But even when your kids are grown, they still learn from you. They learn how to be somebody your age, how to do things that you're dealing with. All the way up until we die, we're still teaching them things that they need to know for when they get to be where we're at. So our testimony's got to be good, and it's got to stay good. And when we make mistakes, God will forgive us for it, but we still sometimes have to go through some things. And Jacob's going through some things. He's just lost his mother's nurse. He just lost his favorite wife. He's fixing to have something else bad happen we're going to look at next week. And then we're going to talk about some more positive stuff. But I just want to be so clear. Two things that we get from this passage, and I know I've been kind of long-winded, but two things I want to make sure you take away from this. Number one is remember to visit the house of God. And I know I'm preaching to the choir, but remember, it's important.